All right. Hello, everyone. This is the July 16th edition of the SIG PM meeting. This is a recorded meeting that is on the internet for posterity, so please be mindful of what you say. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct and be generally awesome to everyone. So we don't have too many crazy things on the agenda. What I would like to walk through really quickly is let me get my passwords off the screen first. I will share my screen. So we've had some progress on the kind of KEPI things. Specifically, a few things that Chuck Ha has worked on. So he's written a script to do some validation of the metadata within KEPs, and let's see what that does. All right, so he has a tool called KEPView, which I've linked in the repo, and KEPView does a few things. There is a fix tool, a KEP fix tool, a KEP val tool, which will do validation, and then a KEPView tool. So KEPView is actually like a command line utility that will allow you to kind of search the KEPs within the repo, or the KEPs within a targeted repo. So it assumes Kubernetes enhancements currently. So we have imported that to in this PR, and a quick bash script to just install that and go through a quick grep of the markdown and the KEPs folder, and then run the KEP validate tool. Right, so that is wired up to our CI process already. We also have some of the, so after we put that in, we did some fixes, or rather Chuck did some fixes to clean up some of the metadata fields within each KEP. So making sure that authors are actually valid YAML, and making sure that links are actually properly quoted, and just a bunch of that was done. So that was merged as well, and then finally the final sweep on killing the YAML validation errors. So improvements to the verify metadata script, and then you can see here we're removing all the KEP numbers, because the KEP numbers don't exist anymore, right? So some nice traction there. A new contributor working on that, not a new contributor to Kubernetes overall, but a new contributor to SIG PM. So that's kind of nice to see. And a tool that we got out of it, right? Free tools, yay. So I'm going to work with Chuck to get this migrated into the Kubernetes, probably Kubernetes or SIG, so that we can use this on a more official basis and kind of push people towards it. From there, I spoke to Brian after KubeCon, or during KubeCon actually, and he was like, yeah, KEPs sound important. We should write a viewer tool. We should have that. So he was like, I'm just going to hack one up on the weekend. And we were like, oh, cool. Yes, do that. Go for it. So Brian showed me something initial, and it's dope. But we need to, I think he's still working on getting the code out for that. So probably a few days before I see something that we can probably push into an org as well. So movement on KEPs, yay, is the short version. So Sam, you might be new to the call. I want to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself.
Cool, hi, thank you. Yeah, I have been floating around the Kubernetes community for a little while. I'm actually an engineering manager at Mesosphere, and I guess I also act as product owner for a couple of things we're doing, and so I take a keen interest in the PM side of Kubernetes as well. And yeah, I'm glad to be here. I'm kind of new to the PM channel, of course, so I'm not sure what I can contribute yet, but happy to sort that out as we go.
Awesome. Well, welcome. I know I've seen you hanging around Twitter and stuff. So thank you for popping in.
Yeah, thank you.
So what we were talking about are KEPs. There's a grand vision for KEPs, and the whole idea is that we want to be able to capture changes that we would make to the project in a singular place, right? Along with like what the plan for the change is, how long it'll take to execute, where the docs are for implementation or usage, the general graduation criteria, what the implementation history is, stuff like that. Right, so kind of having a steel thread where we can tie all these things together. Now, part of it to really be successful, one, we have to have a good process around it. We have to have people aligned on what that process is, and then we have to build tooling to support that process, right? So what we were talking about is essentially the KEP has a metadata field that includes the name of the KEP, the author, the reviewers, approvers, all that good stuff, and occasionally like some links that may link out to KEPs that are related. So what we'd eventually like to do is leverage that metadata to do stuff, whether it's view a KEP on a Pretty website, like the contributor site, or tie it into CI in some way that says like, oh, this KEP is missing, blah, right? So again, find a way to obviate some of the human toil in that process by applying automation. Excuse me. So I was just saying that we've had some progress, and sorry. So we've had some progress there over the last few weeks, and hoping to continue on some of that stuff. Now the second part, oh gosh, I'm sorry. So now second piece of making people's lives easier is the question often comes up in the release team and SIG release in general, how do we do issue triage, right? So it kind of gets down to the wire, and we have the release team, the bug triage team, working on essentially burning down a bunch of issues, right? And we kind of felt that if this happened earlier in the process, if we had bots focusing on some of the stuff instead of humans, we would catch a lot of things earlier. It'd be easier for SIGs across the board to triage their stuff. So Nico, who was the bug triage lead over the last few cycles, he's been on bug triage for a bit. He has compiled a set of notes, suggestions on improvements to the process, which include some automation. So let me pop this into the notes. I would like people to take a look at that because the next step, so we've brought this proposal or suggestions for improvements to the workflow. Essentially what we'd be doing is adding as a good first step, adding a need SIG triage label to the process. And there's kind of a workflow here, but I expand on it a little bit. There's quite a bit of words here. I expand on it a little bit, like what the state machine could potentially look like for issues coming into the project. Right, so having something that is in a triageable state or in a triage state, where you say it applies this needs triage or needs triage label, and it only gets, that label only gets cleared once someone has marked it as it either gets closed or someone has assigned the appropriate actions to it, right? So kind, priority, either needs more info or something, or gets assigned to someone, right? And then magic would happen in the background and bots would clear labels, right? So this state machine probably needs to be updated based on some of the conversations that we had, but we think as a good phase 0-1 of this is, one, capture this idea in a KEP, right? Keep the KEP really tight to just the implementation of the need SIG triage label and any human activity that would be required, right? So adding the has the lifecycle active, right? So I think once you hit lifecycle active, it would clear the triage label, or lifecycle rate ready, right? I think we talked about lifecycle ready too, but it's not in this diagram. Fleur, yeah, lots of chatter. So we brought this to SIG contributor experience. They are on board. They just want to see some more information about it. But yeah, an additional label around lifecycle ready. So there's more discussion about this in, okay, that links back to the same issue. Cool, awesome. There's an issue, there's a PR in here that Nico has already started to work on. That is, okay. Right. Wait, what? Oh, okay. All right. This is actually the PR. I was like losing my mind.
Circular. Yeah.
uh, okay,
This is
so
actually PR. Okay.
yeah, linking the PR as well. That's what you get when you speed read. So a few more fixes. I think Nico will be on vacation for a little bit during the summertime, but I will be picking up the KEP for this stuff. The KEP will be a tag team between PM and contributor experience, since this is something that affects every SIG in the project. We're going to make sure we effectively communicate this before we're doing anything, and I will probably pick up, if he is not back by then, I will pick up the PR to implement this. So I think right now what are we implementing? Blah, blah, blah. So this adds the label. This adds two labels, one for lifecycle ready and another for needs triage. And then I think we just bike shedded a little bit on the names. So I think that's done. This might be ready to go after the KEP lands, actually. So,
Awesome. Cool.
So, one interesting thing to see is Valerie, Athena. Nope. Okay, not quite. But there is an Athena bot, right? I wish I knew exactly where to find it. Hold on. Right, so Valerie wrote a bot because, yeah, there we go. So essentially what it does is I think it runs somewhere, one of the Kubernetes clusters that she has, and we'll try to infer what state an issue is in or how it needs to be tagged, right? Using some light machine learning type things, and we'll like come into the repo and try to tag an issue, right? As like, so this primarily the reason for this was SIG network had a huge backlog of issues, and I think at some point it was like 200, and Tim Hawken was like, I need this like triage something, like anything, like I need something to burn this stuff down. So the bot would come in if it would recognize an issue as a certain SIG type, or if specifically if it was targeted to networking, I think it would mark it as like triage unresolved or something like that. Right, so similar idea. What we want to make sure is that we're not doing any shadow IT type things, right, and make sure that this is something that's part of the project. So I've talked to Valerie about this before, and we'll bounce ideas off of her as well while we're going through this issue triage thing, from lessons learned, one, writing the bot, and two, actually having to go through the triage process within SIG network. So in terms of triage overall, like if you take a look at this issue, you'll see that we link out to probably the grooming section. So SIG cluster lifecycle has written a grooming doc, right? So this is not it, but
Are they the only SIG that attempts any sort of regular grooming?
Um, I can't say that for certain. I can say that they're probably one of the SIGs that is most successful at it.
Okay. I did observe one of their grooming sessions recently, and I was pleased by what I saw anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my coworkers attends it pretty regularly, and he said it's pretty good.
Cool.
You know, so forward looking, I'd like that to be a part of every SIG's process, right? Because you know, what that allows us to do is start to get a better idea. So, you know, part of the release team responsibilities for release notes and communications and the enhancements roles is to essentially bubble up themes for what the release is going to be, what it's going to look like, right? And it's incredibly hard to do that if we have no idea of like the work that's planned for the release, right? And it's hard to get an idea of what work is planned for the release if SIGs are not doing grooming ahead of time, right? So this is kind of like fix the problem everywhere, and hopefully, you know, by the end of the funnel where the release team comes in, we have the information that we need because everything's happening earlier. I also wrote, since we're just going through like GitHub and Google Groups, I also wrote a document or an email, a very long email. I guess not so recently, but yeah.
Have we ever, with SIG PM, have we ever had a grooming session for our own things? I know we have like 50 issues or something. I've looked at it.
We have not. We have not, and I think we probably should. We probably should.
Maybe, maybe we could. I mean, I don't think we'd have to do it as regularly as like, you know, cluster lifecycle or something. Like I think, what do they do every week or every 2 weeks or something? But like maybe like once a quarter, you know?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. I would be down to help facilitate that if you wanted to do it, or if you wanted to do it first, I could do the next one or something.
Yeah, I would say go for it. Go for it. If you want to find time in our calendars to schedule, maybe send out a doodle, and I'll let you run with it.
Sounds good.
So before code freeze happened, or as code freeze was happening, I called out a few things that we should take a look at, and this kind of summarizes like my general thoughts about how PME things affect the release cycle. So one, a lack of approvers and reviewers, or we can do better on increasing the approvers and reviewers across sub-projects, the KEPs, and API review process, right? The issue triage stuff that was mentioned, lots of bike shedding on KEPs. I think that they recently coined a term called KEP rot, which so KEP rot is essentially when you allow a KEP to exist for a really long time without merging it, because you're bike shedding over ideas instead of like merging and iterating. So I'm thinking of adding like an open questions section to KEPs, so that we can kind of like, okay, capture the feedback that you were discussing on the PR, move forward, merge that in, and then iterate over it afterwards, right? So that's like, I think that's a small step that we can do immediately. That might convince people to start moving faster on this stuff. I also want to walk through all of the KEPs and just be annoying and say, hey, this has been open since December. What's going on? Like, can you keep this moving? And while referencing this new open questions section, right? There was an email called "Deadlines Are Horrible," and this is Tim Hawkins, and kind of talking about like some of the deadlines that we have in place that kind of creep up on you. So the release team, so on the SIG release side, we created a Kubernetes release calendar, which spans all release cycles now, that allows you to just like, oh, okay, I can subscribe to this calendar if I know what's going on. So hopefully that will alleviate some of the stress around. I mean, some of it, yeah. As we're moving into these more critical deadlines like enhancements freeze, code freeze, just being generally aware of when the releases are happening, when the patch releases are happening, right? So this email also includes, I think I linked it in the document already. Yep, and that includes a bunch of links at the bottom that reference all these things I'm talking about. So yeah, I do mention SIG planning events. So the whole idea was like, if we can get, if a SIG can start planning right around code freeze, I think that's the right time. That gives them, you know, about a month before we step into the next cycle. And I think that's enough time to like know what KEPs you need to lay down for the next cycle, know the kind of work that you're planning for, right?
I like Kepard.
Kepard.
That's good.
And that, you know, that kind of dovetails into, you know, one of our sub projects, which will be project management, and figuring out how we do that, right? How do we take a project manager that may be either new to the project or not involved in the project at all, right? Give them the power that they need to help SIGs, and then kind of shard them out across the SIGs that need the most help, right? So I know that, you know, contributor experience has a requested one when we get ready to do that. Steering is interested in having a project manager. Network node could probably use help. Auth could probably use help. You know, cluster lifecycle, they're like the gold standard. So like they don't need a project manager yet, although they would, you know, they would benefit from one eventually, right? So kind of identifying where the need is, figuring out what it looks like to onboard someone who is not necessarily part of the project, but has the skills to execute this. And then also understanding what executing this actually means, right? I think, you know, that right now it's maybe a little fuzzy, because it's a lot of brain dumping ideas that have been in a few people's heads, right? So like myself, Jace, Caleb, Igor, right? And Locke to an extent over the you know, the last few cycles. So that said, we have I probably should have mentioned, I've mentioned on the mailing list, but I guess it's good to mention here, have it recorded. We have 2 new chairs, right? Or newish chairs, right? So one, welcome Jace as a SIG PM chair. Lockie Evenson, so Jace is open source strategy at Google, program manager, right? I got all that right. And then Lockie Evenson, who is at Microsoft as an open source program manager, on Kubernetes and cloud related things. So you've probably seen him around. Also one of the release team leads currently. He is the 116 release team lead. So Aparna has stepped down. Ihor has stepped down. So the current team is myself, Jace, Caleb, and Lockie. Right. So welcome. Round of applause. Yay. So that's, you know, about it on my side. I want to see if we have questions, comments, concerns, things that we need to do. Let's put down that we should plan for and I can probably stop sharing my screen now too, right? All right.
Yep, that sounds good. So I'll do like a doodle just on the mailing list. Is that best, or should I do like the Slack channel?
Go for the mailing list, and just be aware that it is Kubernetes SIG PM, and not Kubernetes PM. So it used to be Kubernetes PM, and we changed it to SIG PM to kind of fall in line with everything else. But yeah, cool.
I have a question if there's time.
Yeah, sure.
Has there been any sort of, I don't know if introspection is the right word, but evaluation of the KEP process and what might cause, I mean, excessive bike shedding or other factors of basically delaying them? Yeah.
Yes, somewhat. I'm digging up the issue right now. So I did an initial change update to the kept template, and we got some feedback out of that. Let me find. I'm curious, have you had an opportunity to interact with keps? Do you know?
I know a little about them, but I haven't ever filed one myself or reviewed one or anything like that. So
Okay, all
I
right,
should say I'm rather novice to the particular topic.
okay. So let me, oh, look, the issue is rotten. Surprise, surprise. Right, so there are some suggestions here. I'll pop it in the chat as well as the doc. So I don't think that captures everything, right? I think one of the, I think one of the questions that comes up often is, from the SIG side, it's I want to graduate my thing from this stage to this stage, right? And I think from the release team side, we often get the or not just the release team, but I think everyone who invariably gets involved in the process, it becomes a, well, before we graduate this thing to beta, we should do laundry list of things, right? And depending on the person who is involved in naming that list, it may differ. So I've said this before and said again, but it's probably time to add an issue for tracking what it means to like project-wide graduation criteria, right? So right now we don't have that, right? So the bar that an enhancement has to meet to graduate depends on the SIG, the people involved, the people who may see the KEP, right? And I think that if we had that, it would be easy to just point someone to a doc and say like, go do, must have these many tests, this rate of user adoption, these docs written to graduate from beta to GA or something, right? Or even just some sort of loose rubric for that stuff.
Is there anything like that that exists right now? Like any even like baseline?
Not that I know of. No.
This is a fairly common concept of what you might call definition of done, though.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. All right. I don't mean to cut you off. Was there more you wanted to say there?
Oh, no. I cut myself off.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I guess I was wondering, in part because I've seen similar dynamics in other cases where often bike shedding is a result of no one driving it with the attitude of a sense of urgency, and in combination with a sense that this is like a one-shot deal where we have to get it perfect now,
Yes.
as opposed to the option of iteration. So that leads to different assumptions about how you engage on something like a KEP. So I guess I was curious, maybe has there been any reflection on that as well?
So I think that part of it has been things that are merged feel like they have a level of approval. So there was a concern that I get my KEP merged and all of a sudden I can do whatever I want, and you said it was okay, and the chain of custody around the decision-making process. And that was really because people were obviating the metadata process, because really the metadata in theory should be the record of decision. So there's just been a lot of misunderstanding about what it's intended for, and people being very used to draconian approval processes that have many moving parts, and so speak now or forever hold your peace. And I think that it's just been a lot of misconceptions more than anything than any particular failing. That
Okay.
seem right, Stephen?
Yeah. I think, I do think that part of it is, we even have in the documentation, like the idea is merge early, iterate often, right? There's an assumption of like finality to merging a KEP, which, should not be true. Like this is again, like it's not just a statement of record, it is a living document, right? So there are also multiple stages or states that KEPs can be in, right? And one of them is provisional, right? That means, hey, a SIG thinks like this is a grand idea, right? But we haven't figured it all out yet, right? Let's at least lock in the idea of having the idea and figure out how to execute on that, right? So you can still come back to something and firm it up. You can even do that for something that is in, one of the next states is implementable, right? So that means like we've got enough of the pieces in place, we have the people activated to do this work, and we know how we're going to execute on it, right? This is what the plan looks like. There's implemented, which is obviously like, we've done it, it's done, cool, flip it to implemented. But there are also states like deferred and rejected, right? So like maybe we're not going to do this right now, or maybe we will never do this because of this reason, right? But at least being able to, so, the reason that we even have that state is, I feel, I'm starting to feel like the deferred state is useless, because like we're essentially signaling that something's getting deferred by not merging it right now, right?
When it
Mhm.
when it gets to the point of implementable, is it possible to like? Is it then possible at that point that it could be like merged? And then if so, like maybe we can have some kind of thing that like automatically reminds people to be like, hey, merge early, iterate often, or something like that,
Yeah, it's I think we have to figure out like what the order of operations is. So
Mm,
like what I'd love to see is like reading the metadata that signals like reviewers and approvers and automatically tagging those reviewers and approvers, right? Or when a new cycle hits, right? Maybe we have something stored somewhere that signifies when a new cycle starts, right? Have
mm,
a bot automatically say like, hey, this cap is still open. Like, are you planning to do anything for the cycle? Like right now we have humans doing that, right? And there's a measure
yeah,
of, there's a measure of like human interaction that is nice, because I think it encourages the work as opposed to having a bot do it. You're like, oh, well, Bot comes by every 30 days. I know to expect him and ignore his comment maybe, right? As opposed to like a human nagging you. So that's part of the reason that the enhancements team is around to do that nagging,
got
and to do the legwork required to get status on certain things. But yeah, I do want to see more. I don't know what more is yet.
yeah. But even if it's not a bot, like, would implementable mean that it's okay to merge? Because even at that point, like, you could just go through and search and like look at all the ones that are tagged that or at that state or whatever, and then like, yeah, like,
Yeah, so implementable is actually, it's not in an implementable state until it's merged, right? So like opening a PR to flip something to an implementable state does not mean the thing is in an implementable state, right? We've only like decided that it's implementable by
mm,
approving that PR, right?
got it.
But we've added a release team checklist, right? To the KEP, where is right here, right? So a little heads up about, hey, like if you want this in a release, here are the things that you need to do. And one of the things is to make sure that that KEP is set to implementable, right?
Got it.
Um, so every KEP for an enhancement that is moving into Kubernetes should have this release team checklist. And if it doesn't, that's also something that the enhancements group will nag you about.
Got it. Got it.
Right. The enhancement is considered at risk until this checklist is clear.
Cool.
Cool. Okay. I think that gives me more context, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, same.
So we have 20 more minutes, but we are out of agenda topics. So I want to see if we open mic it real quick. If not, give you back some time.
You mentioned something like one of them was automatically tagging reviewers from the metadata. So that doesn't currently exist.
No, we have a separate mechanism to do that. So
Okay.
Blunderbuss, I believe, is the name of the plugin, right? So
Okay.
yeah, so Prow has a bunch of plugins that do magic things in repos. One of them is Blunderbuss, and Blunderbuss will look at a set of owners files, right?
Mhm.
And so each repo, so if you're familiar with code owners, like the GitHub concept, or so we have something analogous, which is called owners, the owners files. Each repo should have a top level owners file. And then you can also have subdirectory owners files, right? So each of the keps, so the way we structure it, I will share my screen one more time. So the way that we structure it is, so enhancements, right? And then you can see both owners and the owner's alias, right? So we have a few approvers and reviewers in this repo. So the PM maintainers and SIG PM leads, and then reviewers or feature maintainers that kept process approvers, reviewers, and SIG release leads, right? So we want each of these people to be aware of what's happening in the repo, right? Now within, oh, okay, there we go. Right, so this is basically a copy, and I should probably update this now. Probably update this at least once a cycle, but this is a copy out from Kubernetes community repo of their aliases, including some custom content that we have, right? So PM maintainers include the SIG chairs, the feature maintainers include the previous features and enhancements leads. Process approvers actually mirror the PM maintainers right now, but we've got reviewers, kept reviewers who include chairs and top level reviewers or approvers from SIG architecture. And that's same for kept reviewers and approvers, right? So the reason that we segment some of the stuff that way is so that we can get a little bit more granular on the way that we set owners here, right? So the owners in the keps directory has something called no parent owners true, right? So this is done so that only people who are cleared to approve all content for keps are the ones reviewing or approving all content for keps, right? So there may be PM reviewers that are cleared to edit other data within the repo, but not the keps, right? And there are very few cases like that, but this is more of a safety than anything, right?
Got it.
So when it comes in, it's okay. The kept reviewers or process review approvers are approvers for this, and same for the reviewers. And then it will also label it with a kind kept label, any PR that comes in editing this repo, right? That subdirectory specifically, right? Now you'll see in, we'll take my SIGs, right? Right, so Azure specifically, you'll see in the Azure owners, right, that references the SIG Azure leads and will label what's SIG Azure, right? And then same is true for release, right? Right, so what was the question? Oh, okay, right. Yeah, so we have ways of making sure that appropriate people are tagged, because Blunderbuss will go in, look at these owner files, dissect
Yeah.
the aliases, and then tag people for review. And
Got
the
it.
only people who can review, anyone can review, right? But the only ones who can actually approve to merge will either be someone who is in this, say, SIG release directory as an owner, or someone who is in the top level KEPS
Got it.
directory, right?
Cool.
So we don't necessarily need an additional thing that does that. What I was thinking is I think that the it gets kind of fuzzy when say I review a KEP, right? I review a KEP when it is in a provisional state, right? And then so say I'm the reviewer and approver for the KEP while it's in provisional state, right? And then I say, okay, well, this is something that our SIG is going to drive forward next cycle. We need to make sure that it's implementable before we do anything else, right? So I decide that I'm going to edit the KEP, and then I essentially become an author for it as well, right? So I'm an author, I'm a reviewer, and an approver for it, right? So is there a way to delineate some of that stuff? Do we care to do that? There's also an editor field that can be used. I think that there's a point where it goes beyond an edit. You're changing like a lot of functional things that you are. I mean, I think you're better classified as an author. So like the metadata fixes that Chuck added, those can be considered like that was kind of like copy editing, right?
Yeah.
But Chuck is not actually editing any of the technical content of the KEP, right? But I don't know. Maybe we get rid of that field altogether. But there's a weirdness of describing someone, like finally defining what that person is to that KEP, right? They can easily be an author, a reviewer, and an approver all at the same time.
Yeah, and that's always that's tricky.
Yeah.
Got it. So not a high priority in the list of things to do, but because we already have something, but something one day. Yeah.
Yeah. So my at least like personal plans, I have just to like, I guess, set expectations. The first thing I'm focusing on right now is SIG release, and making sure that we've moved we've gotten rid of the test info role. We've moved the branch manager role out of the release team into under the release engineering subproject. So we're building out this like release managers group right now, making sure that the documentation for the new release manager associates thing is easy to follow is like my top priority right now, so that people can be successful throughout that cycle. After that, so that should be a quickish fix, probably done in a week and a half or something. After that, SIG Azure is folding under SIG Cloud Provider. So there is lots of administrivia involved in that stuff that I'm kind of corralling. So that will be the next thing, because we also have to make sure that Azure lands KEPs before enhancements freeze. So that will be my next focus. And then afterwards, it will be all the SIG PM stuff. So just giving everyone a heads up, like that's my plan of attack.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, but great idea on actually doing planning for ourselves, watching the watchers, right?
I feel like it's a good place to start,
Yeah. Because I will say that, like right now, a lot of those things are just assigned to me. So now that we have people who are showing up and interested in the work, I can start charting some of that stuff out. So.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I noticed it was like all you. And I think there's like 50 something issues.
Yeah, I was like, I don't need to do that anymore.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, I'll get that started pretty soon, hopefully. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. All right, 10 minutes left. Anything else that people want to chat about?
I'm good.
Cool. All right. Well, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
You too.
Yeah.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye.